Welcome back. We've got more now from our focus group of double haters in Arizona, and an issue that has both campaigns pretty worried third-party candidates. The 12 panelists from our focus group were asked who they supported in a two-way race. President Biden had a 5-3 lead over former President Donald Trump, and 4 people said they wouldn't vote if Biden and Trump were their only options. But when given 5 candidate choices, independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. got 5 votes, and Green Party candidate Jill Stein got 2 votes. Biden got 2, and Trump got 1. And when they were asked about Kennedy, a couple of our panelists who said they would vote for him admitted they didn't have a ton of knowledge about what he stands for. Take a listen to this part of the conversation.
I picked him because I know he would be good for the economy because I know he's involved in stocks and then crypto. And I don't know if he was an environmental or he does something, I don't know, with the environment. So I think he's just hopefully help with the economy and environment.
Well, I know that he is one. So for me, it's really just past history. A family history for him, basically what his uncle did for our country. I haven't really looked up his policies, but based on who we have, I would lean towards him with a little bit more research.
Joining me now on set are 2 of the journalists involved in these Decider focus groups, NBC's Yamiche Alcindor and Margaret Talev, director of the Syracuse University Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. I mean, these are among the most fascinating conversations. Yamiche, what were your key takeaways, particularly as it relates to what you heard from these voters about RFK Jr.?
I think this group really overall underscored that for this segment of the population that really isn't excited, they really have negative views on both President Biden and former President Trump. You had some of them calling former President Trump a liar, saying that he was racist, saying that he was someone who was cruel and harsh. But then on the other side, you had people saying President Biden looks weak. He makes the whole country look weak. They talked about his age. They talked about the fact that they didn't agree with his policies. So that was really interesting. And, you know, you ran down the numbers there when it came to RFK Jr. The first group, because we watched these for 3 hours back to back. The first group, I was struck by the fact when it became a 5-way race, just in that first group, neither of the people in the group said that they would vote for President Biden or former President Trump. So it was really interesting that they literally got 0 votes from either one of these parties. It was also important to note that they had strong views on other things like abortion and the border. But it really, I think, again, just underscores that they're just not excited about this supposed and likely rematch.
And, you know, Kristen, if RFK were able to convince these voters and other voters between now and November that he were a consensus candidate, a centrist candidate, a moderate, a good alternative to Biden and Trump if you're trying to split the difference, someone who would harness the Kennedy family legacy, and he were able to keep his actual policies and beliefs and stances at bay, he would be a serious threat to both of these candidates, but they don't know anything about his policies on abortion, on vaccinations, really on anything. And most of them admitted they hadn't done their homework yet. They were looking for someone else. They liked the idea of him, but they needed to do more work before they really knew where they stood.
What did it tell you? I mean, you heard, to your point, you heard one of the voters say, hopefully he can do something about the economy.
These are kind of Hail Mary voters.
These are double haters.
They are double haters.
What's fueling them, and when do you get the sense that they will engage more deeply, Margaret, at some point?
You know, that's a really good question. It is May. Most of these voters in both of the panels that we spent time with are not deeply consuming 2024 election news every night. Will they between now and November? A lot of them are getting their news from social media, or they're getting their news from local news or, you know, networks. But when asked about social media, they're all going to TikTok or Instagram or talking to their friends or whatever to get their impressions of these people. So they have superficial knowledge and a real distaste for the status quo. And they're either thinking, I might as well just stay home, or they're looking for something else. Anything else. They think that Biden can't get stuff done. They think that Trump can get stuff done, but many of them are so turned off by the drama and the chaos and the personal politics that he brings.
Yamiche, when you think about, and you've listened to a lot of these focus groups now, and you've listened to a lot of double haters, do you think there is enough time to sway them? Because obviously the concern, if you're the Biden camp and the Trump camp, is not just that they vote for RFK Jr., that's part of it, but that they're going to sit this one out.
My sense is that some of these people, I almost want to say a minority of them, are persuadable because some of them have such strong views. Because again, it's a rematch. They already saw 4 years of Trump. They've already seen 3.5 years of Biden. So they have really entrenched views both on their policies, though sometimes they didn't really know a lot about their policies, frankly, but also on just sort of the image of who they are. A lot of this, I think, is image. It's just sort of what they think of Biden, what they think of Trump. When you dug in and said, okay, well, what policy don't you like in particular? There weren't a lot of them that were pointing to a whole long list of things that they didn't like about President Biden or, frankly, President Trump. Even when it comes to the border, it's like, yeah, I didn't like the wall, but they weren't talking about sort of specific things that have been passed. But I also think it underscores that in a close race, which of course is what's going to happen with this rematch, that if you can persuade 2 or 3 of these people, that really could be the deciding factor in a place as close as Arizona. So I think they are persuadable. I think both campaigns really need to do a lot of work to make sure that people sort of change their views of them if they don't like them. And also, I think a lot of this is also beating up the other guy, frankly. Even though, you know, both parties want to say, I'm focusing on my guy, I think Donald Trump is beating up on Biden for a reason here.
Margaret, quick final point from you.
Abortion politics, fascinating in this discussion. I encourage everyone to go online and watch it. Even conservative voters really struggling with the idea that perhaps their own daughters could be punished if that were a choice they needed to make one day. It's really, really worth a watch. It was. We were up late. We couldn't look away.
I was going to say these were voters in Arizona, so I know you guys were up late, and we appreciate it because this was fantastic and incredibly revealing. So thank you both for being here. Appreciate it, Yamiche and Margaret.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.